If you want talk, games, and fun all rolled into one, well, you've come to the right place. This is The Game Show, where host Bradley Clarke and his special guests talk about the world of television game and competition shows. But Bradley's guests aren't here to just talk. They came to play a game as well. What will today's topic be? What game does Bradley have planned? There's only one way to find out.
It's time to start the show.
You heard the man. Welcome to The Game Show. And here's your host, the Bradster himself, Bradley Clarke.
Austin Angelo never disappoints with his intro. Thank you so much, my friends, and welcome everybody to another exciting episode of The Game Show, the talk show all about the world of television game and competition shows. I'm Bradley Clarke, the Bradster, and this is a very special episode because I don't have just one special guest. I don't have just two special guests. I have three special guests joining me on The Game Show today. But to start off, I have a very important question to ask all of you listeners. Are you ready to get miserable? No, seriously, this isn't a joke question. I'm genuinely asking, are you ready to get miserable? Well, if you're still confused as to why I'm asking you this question, let me explain that today's episode revolves around the most miserable game show on television.
Welcome to the Misery Index, where you can make a fortune from other people's misfortune.
So that's murder then? Where's that rate on the index?
It is between. You said above.
They made me do it!
You are correct.
You're doing great, Jim!
Let's get miserable.
Yes, it's the Misery Index, the show where everyday Americans try to rate real, unfortunate human events and situations on a scale of 1 to 100 based on how miserable they think a group of psychologists graded them. However, they don't face the Misery Index alone, as each contestant is partnered up with two of the four Tenderloins, A.K.A. the Impractical Jokers, Sal, Joe, Murr, and Q, who are misery experts in their own rights. The Misery Index is actually based on a card game with a name that I legally cannot say on the radio. But I can tell you that the title is a popular phrase, and the first word in the game's title is the word sit with the letter H in between the S and the I, and the second word is happens. I'm sure you can figure out what the title of the game is based on that description. The game was created in 2016, and in 2019, a game show version called The Misery Index premiered on TBS, hosted by actress Jamila Jamil. My first guest today created the card game The Misery Index is based on, co-created the Misery Index game show, and is an executive producer on the show as well. I'm glad to share the airwaves with him today to chat about his card game and the success of the game show. Please welcome onto the game show, Andy Breckman. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite, Bradley.
It is such a pleasure having you as my guest. I had an incredible time working alongside you on the Season 2 production of the Misery Index, and I'm glad we now get to chat about how your card game and the Misery Index game show came to be. However, before we begin our conversation, I want to introduce my second and third special guests who will be joining us to talk about the Misery Index. They are co-creators and executive producers of the TBS game show. However, they are not only television producing partners, they are also real-life brothers. Give it up for the founders of the production company Grandma's House Entertainment, the Newmark brothers, Ben and Dan. Welcome to the game show, Ben and Dan.
Hey, Bradley. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's great.
As someone who hopes to produce game shows one day, it's such a pleasure having both of you join us in on the conversation.
I can tell you already have the voice, and we're honored to be here.
You do. You have the game show attitude nailed.
Well, I've been practicing my come on downs and my survey says for a while. Well, I've been looking forward to this because I really didn't get a chance to talk with the three of you as much as I would have liked to during the production days of the Misery Index, and I'm really looking forward to later on in the show because for the game of the day, each of you are going to switch positions from game creator and producers to game players, as I have created a Misery Index-inspired game for all of you to play.
Whoa.
That is horrifying.
It is horrifying.
So Andy, Ben, and Dan, are you ready to get miserable?
Yes.
Not really.
I think you mean more miserable.
I'm with you. I'm there already.
So I want to start off by asking you, Andy, You're probably best known for being a comedy writer on shows like Saturday Night Live and Late Night with David Letterman, as well as creating the TV show Monk. But in 2014, you launched Uncle Andy's Toys, which is a collection of toys and games that you have created. So what was your inspiration for wanting to start creating games, and how did the concept for the Misery Index come about?
You're exactly right. From almost all of my entire career, I was writing scripted shows, mostly comedies, shows and movies. I had a show run for about 8 seasons. And when that ended, I was kind of burnt out. I was in my 50s and wanted to try something new and always wanted to start a company. And I founded, as you said, a toy and game company, Uncle Andy Toys. And one of my first games was a party game, a card game called Shit Happens, which is a pretty simple mechanic. Mechanic is a word that I learned when I was developing games. You were given a series of horrific events, and the players had to put them in order based on how horrible a psychiatrist or a therapist ranked them. And that was the idea for the game. And instead of peddling it to toy companies directly, I thought I would crowdfund it. I thought I'd put it on Kickstarter and maybe sell a few copies of the game myself. And I put together what I thought was a pretty funny 3-minute promotional video for the game. And I put it up on Kickstarter. And on the second day after it was up, a toy company, Goliath Games, called and asked about licensing the game. So that was pretty exciting. And then on the third day it was up, the next day, these two guys, my co-guests on the show, Ben and Dan, saw the Kickstarter promo online and responded to it. And that started the process. And suddenly I was in the game show game, as it were. And these guys dragged me kicking and screaming into that world. So they can take over the story from there.
Yeah, we fell in love with the game, obviously. And once we realized it was Andy Breckman and everything he had done, I was like, oh my God, we have to figure something else out here. And so the mechanics of the game are amazing. And then our job altogether was to come up with a way to blow it up for television and really create a game show format around this amazing game that Andy had created. And so we spent a couple months doing that. And then once we felt like we had it, we literally just went around town pitching it. And Andy flew out from New York for those pitches, and we played the format and the game all the way through each pitch. And a lot of different networks wanted to buy it. And one of our best meetings was at TBS. And we kind of felt after our run there that that was the perfect home for this. And it turned out to obviously be.
An interesting side note is, Ben, you might not even remember this, but my deal with Ben was I would fly out on my own dime. And then if we got an offer, you and your brother would reimburse me for the expenses.
I don't think we ever reimbursed Andy.
You actually did. You were very.
Oh, we did.
You were very, I think very prompt. And
I was
very,
going to say, Andy, were you waiting for this podcast to tell us to owe you money?
No. But based on our initial meetings, that was how confident I was. Maybe I was naive also.
And that was how cheap Dan and I were. Thank you, Andy.
It worked out great.
So, Andy, when you were creating this concept, did you ever imagine it as a television game show, or did you just simply see it as a home card game?
It never once crossed my mind until I got the first phone call from Ben and Dan. The mechanic that we've been discussing was inspired by a game called Chronology, which my family used to play when we were on vacation. Chronology has 300 cards in the box, and each card has a historical event, like the light bulb is invented, or World War I begins, those kind of events. And you have to put them in the right sequence. So I kind of borrowed that mechanic and just applied it to a game kind of like Cards Against Humanity, a subversive, funny card game.
And Ben and Dan, the Misery Index is the first game show that the two of you have produced, correct?
That's right, yeah. This was our first one. We've developed a bunch and had sold some, but this was the first one that made it to air, yeah.
So being that game shows are very trendy right now in TV, especially comedic game shows, was a game show something that you'd always wanted to produce and hopefully get on the air?
Yeah, that was the holy grail for us. Dan and I had some big overall deals as producers at Fremantle Media when we first started, and we watched what they did with game shows. And we learned very early on that if you create a game show that can stand the test of time and repeat and travel around the world, that was the thing that you really wanted to do. And so we knew that. Dan and I come from a comedy background. I mean, we're Grandma's House Entertainment because we used to go to our grandma's house to watch Seinfeld and Friends. And so we always wanted to be in the comedy space. And so a comedy game show feels when you're taping it like a sitcom. So we always wanted to do that. And once we sold this, we knew that this was going to be the one that everybody pointed to say, these are the types of shows that we're all about. So it was great.
The concept of the card game is that each player has their own lane of pain, which is a lineup of miserable event cards, each with its own misery index rating. And the player must decide where they think the next card's miserable event rating falls on their lane. The first round of the game show, Misery Lane, is a condensed version of the overall card game, but the other rounds deviate from the card game's concept. So when the format for the game show was being created, was it known that you wanted to keep the basis of the card game as one of the rounds, but then create different games for each of the other rounds?
Oh, it was very much a part of the conversation of the development process, how we play it and the things that you love about it when you play it with your friends, that original card game. I think for us, when we were developing it, in game shows, you always try and escalate and elevate the tension and the stakes and the drama every round or the further the show gets along. And so I think that there were things that we knew that we wanted from the original card game, but there were also things that we knew we wanted to somehow build upon so that it didn't feel like the same game for an entire half hour. It felt like always staying true to the gameplay of the original game, but elevating it and changing up the structure a little bit on round to round so that it always felt like the show was evolving. And so what you can kind of sense from the format is that every round, it is a slightly different version of what's true to the game, which is looking at miserable events and trying to figure out where they rank, whether that's in the first round, it's Misery Lane, where you're creating a lane of misery, or which one's worse, or trying to guess within a range, or trying to guess the actual number. They're all different ways to basically play a similar version of gameplay, which is looking at content and trying to establish, if that were me, where would that fall? And so I think the thing that helped was that when we went around pitching the show, we played the card game, the original card game with everybody, and everyone had a good time and laughed, and we made fun of each other. And we said, okay, what you just did was essentially round one of our game, and then let us show you visually how we're elevating that as the show goes along.
It seems obvious, of course, in hindsight, but what Ben and Dan did was really a 2-year process of trial and error, experimenting with different variations of the game until they got the perfect balance and the perfect flow to the game.
Yeah, we did years of run-throughs where we tried different rounds, a lot of things that were really great and fun that might still actually, especially leading up to the next season, we might throw in a few surprises to change up the gameplay a little bit. But in general, we tried a ton of different versions of it, different rounds, and watched it come to life and ended up with the ones that you see.
Do you remember any of the different rounds that you tried out?
Oh, yeah. There's one that we tried out that was like a speed round where the two teams sort of competed against each other in trying to correctly place things above, below, and between whatever as fast as they can in speed. And the tension of that was really great. And the gameplay mechanism worked really well. You got this many right. How many are you going to get right? But what it lost was, at the end of the day, this show is a comedy show with a game mechanism. And what you lose by having to try and fly through all these things is you lose the banter and the comedy that really is what's the heart of the show. And so I think that's just one example of the game mechanism would work, but did it add to the comedy or did it take it away? And if it didn't add to it, then we wouldn't do it.
Andy, did you help during the creative process of coming up with the different rounds used on the game show?
I was more of a sounding board, and I occasionally, if I was in LA, I would be a guinea pig and sit in on some meetings, and they would test the game, and I might participate in that. But this was all new to me. It was uncharted waters for me. So it was more of a learning experience for me, and I put in my 2 cents every once in a while. But for the most part, these guys really carried the ball.
And since you used many miserable events to create the card game, were you involved with finding and choosing the miserable events used on the game show?
That's a good question. When I made the card game, of course, the events were made up. I just created the events using my imagination. I also had an art director, Johnny Celentano, who was my partner in creating the game. And we would just sit in the office and make up cards based on nothing but our own imagination, our own twisted, sick, sad vision of the world. For example, being sexually molested by a bear while you're stuck in a bear trap. It never happened to me, but it made me laugh. Or being buried alive is a bad thing. That never happened to me. Or waking up, finding a dead hooker in your bed.
That happened.
Well, she wasn't dead when I found her.
Oh, God.
So technically it didn't happen. So I would make these things up, and then I made a list and sent them out to my sister, who's a social worker and a therapist, and she and her friend rated them for me. And that was how the card game was made. But these guys had the brilliant idea of basing it not on our imagination, but basing it on real life. And this, I think, was as smart as any move we made in the process. Ben and Dan realized that there were enough home videos and newspaper stories and articles out there that you don't have to make anything up. And that added a whole new dynamic to the game, and I think that really put it over the top.
So Ben and Dan, how do you end up finding the real-life scenarios that are used on the Misery Index? Do you go on Google and type in miserable events that happen to people? Do you scroll down on certain websites? Do you search social media? How do these scenarios get chosen for the show?
We actually have a team of people here that do that for the show. Originally, when we were pitching the show, yes, we and our development team scoured the web and came up with fun stuff to put on the pitch. But for the actual show, we have a team of researchers and then writers that come on and look for these. And they all submit into one Google Doc, and then we all sit around the office and we click through all of the links. And their job is to surf the web. It's a crazy gig. It's wild what people find online. Because again, if you even just come up with something right now that you think is crazy and a crazy misery and you Googled it, chances are it happened. And so some people come up with things and Google them, and then they find the article. And then some people just kind of search around and they get taken to different places online throughout the day to find the best videos. And then we figure out what's best for the show at that point.
So Andy, the instructions of the card game mention that the events are ranked by a panel consisting of marriage counselors, therapists, career counselors, and social workers. So I'm curious, how many individual people actually rated the miserable scenarios for the card game?
The truth is, for the original card game, I sent the list of our original cards to my sister and 9 of her friends. I thought I'd get 10 therapists to grade them. But the only people that did the survey was my sister and her best friend. So I only had 2 responses. So I used those responses, and then Johnny, my partner, and I had to rate them ourselves.
And Ben and Dan, for the game show, the rankings are determined by psychologists, but can you reveal how many psychologists are actually asked to rate the scenarios?
We can't quite get into how many are a part of the panel, but I can say that it's a decent-sized panel of doctors, therapists of all different focuses that rate them and also give explanations as to the ratings, and then we combine them and find the average for each one.
Was there ever any thought on the game show to either have one of the psychologists on the stage to describe why it was rated this number, or at least maybe have Jamila, the host, describe why that number was that number?
That is what we initially did up until the day before we shot the first episode. And it is such a heartbreaking story. We had this absolutely incredible, brilliant therapist that was on set with us that in a comedic way would answer things in a very scientific manner as to why different things had long-term psychological impact and emotional distress and all of these different things, that it really worked well. But what we found in a rehearsal at the end of the day was that there just wasn't enough time. We only get 21, 22 minutes. And to get all the content, all of the gameplay, the Impractical Jokers, riffing, Jamila with her comedy, to service all of that was packing the show already. And we realized that it wasn't a creative decision. She was amazing. It was just that we didn't have time to service it. And so the day before we shot the first episode of the first season, we ended up, unfortunately, having to make the decision to not have a therapist involved in the show on stage.
Jamila does occasionally explain how the rating was arrived at least in kind of broad strokes.
The host of the show is actress Jamila Jamil, who people might know from NBC's The Good Place. But the stars of the Misery Index are the Tenderloins, A.K.A. the Impractical Jokers, Sal, Joe, Murr, and Q. And 2 of the Tenderloins are assigned to each of the contestants for extra guidance throughout the game. So how did the Tenderloins originally become involved with the Misery Index?
The show was basically greenlit to series, and there were 2 different versions that it could have been: an at midnight version where it's rotating comedians, or a set panel of comedians. And the hard part about finding the set panel is chemistry is so key. And in a meeting with Turner, we've always been fans of Impractical Jokers, fans of the Tenderloins. So it came up in a meeting for them to be the 4 staple guys. And we flew to New York, and we had one run-through pitch where we had them play through the format. And honestly, it was the funniest thing we had ever experienced. We all left that room realizing that they elevated the show to such a different level that there was no turning back. And the truth is they don't have a lot of time either. So I think they were also hesitant in saying, all right, well, I want to run through this and make sure it's right for us. And I think the group as a whole felt the second that meeting was over that it was undeniable that they had to be a part of it.
Perfect vehicle for them.
To tie it off with Jamila, we had the guys on. And then I was like, okay, well, who would be the perfect person to be on that stage with them? Someone who is funny, someone who can manage the four of them. And Jamila was the absolute perfect person for that. She does such a great job. She's obviously a brilliant host, but then on top of that, her comedic chops and her way of dealing with them almost makes her, and they say it all the time, a fifth Tenderloin. So it just worked out perfectly. We had the perfect combo.
And I'm guessing from those initial meetings with the Tenderloins is that they were always going to be contestant helpers and not viewed as potential hosts of the Misery Index, correct?
Yeah, we always knew and hoped that they would be on the team with the contestant, not necessarily the host. It just worked out. We wanted two comedians on each team, and they fit perfectly, and they wanted to do it. And so we always had that idea for them as opposed to host.
In the card game, there are some events that feature a 0.5 rating. For example, a lost wallet is a 40.5, and being locked out of your house while naked is a 36.5. However, on the game show, the event ratings are rounded to the nearest whole number. So were there ever any talks about using a 0.5 rating system and not just whole numbers?
We never went with 0.5. I think it's fun to play along with that in the actual card game because there's fun reveals of it being just 0.5 off. But in game shows, you want to keep everything really clean and not make it confusing unless it's something that's absolutely necessary to explain.
0.5 was added to the card game only when there were extension packs made by the game company, and we had more than 100 cards. The scale is only up to 100, so we ended up with like 500 different cards because there are various different versions of the game. So they had to add a 0.5 and a 0.3 and a 0.6. That was the game company's decision. I should also mention that not having decimal points means that ties are possible, which are very dramatic and has happened on the game show more than once. And that's always the high point when the two teams tie.
Say all three of you were contestants on this show. How well do you think you would do?
You know what's so funny about that? We see so many events that oftentimes, especially for the final round, we forget the ratings and we play along in the control room because you see so many and we're fortunate enough to shoot so many that we play along. We've all gotten better. I'm terrible. I don't know who would be the best between us.
It's not me. I'm terrible too. What's interesting is that the Tenderloins, they're getting better too, I think, every season, but there's still surprises in every game and in every round. But they're learning how the therapists think as well. It's all about trying to outthink the panel of experts.
So I pride myself in studying the formats of game shows, and on the first ever episode of the Misery Index in Season 1, I noticed a flaw in the game because the situation actually occurred between the two contestants.
I'm sorry, you just cut out, all of us lost you. Weird. Hello?
So I'm taking that you did notice this as well, and for the listeners who don't know about the flaw I'm referring to, in the first round, each contestant gets a separate miserable event worth $500. In the second round, each contestant once again gets a separate miserable event worth $1,000. However, in the third round, each contestant plays the same miserable event and the winner of the round gets $2,000. This means that since each contestant can accumulate up to $1,500 during the first two rounds, and only one of the two contestants receives $2,000 in the third round, mathematically the first two rounds mean absolutely nothing since you can't build up a meaningful lead before the third round. So I'm curious if this flaw was talked about while you were designing the format of the game.
This was very much talked about, and here's the deal. The idea behind this is the first two rounds are about learning the misery index. How do you play? How do you rate? Where are the shrinks rating things? Really getting your groove in the game. The third round is the master of misery. So who has mastered, who has learned and figured out where the shrinks are rating things the best? And this third round, this is why we love the stakes of this round. So to us, it's not a flaw. To us, it's like, okay, this is the big stakes round. Yes, in theory, you have earned some money throughout if you move on. But this round is all about, okay, what have you learned and how close can you get to the actual misery? And the team who gets closest to the actual misery gets to move on to the next round. And so, yes, we definitely understand why you could look at that like a flaw. And I'm not saying it's not. But I'm definitely saying that, in our opinion, it really elevated the stakes to that third round, as Dan was talking about. How do we elevate the stakes in each round? And that third round really is high stakes. And what have you learned, and who learned it the most?
And Bradley, there's another element, which is you look at other formats that have worked really well. You look at something like Family Feud, that's got probably about 10 million episodes at this point, and it's a similar flaw. What they're acknowledging, and I think what we're acknowledging and other formats acknowledge, are two things. One, this is a comedy show. It's a comedy game show. We built this format to get the most comedy, but then elevate in the tension as the show goes along. And I think even though we knew, yes, it does all weigh on round 3, the at-home play-along is what makes, as you know, a game show work. You want to be able to play along and figure out how well you would do. And that still stays through the format. Every round, you can always play along and figure out whether you would be good or not good at the game. And so to us, that was the most important element, along with looking at other things that have worked that have a similar structure, that it didn't concern us too much.
We knew if it worked, then Dan and I would take credit, but if it didn't, it was Andy's idea.
As always.
And
Also, the other reason for it, I think, is, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, we didn't want to eliminate any contestant in round 1 and 2. We wanted to keep the drama and keep it possible that everybody's still in the game.
Yeah, you look at it, because we didn't want to eliminate anyone, you have to make it that in round 3, anyone can win. And you don't have a lot of time to get to that answer. And so we just didn't like the idea of eliminating people, especially if we've got comedians that we have. We want them on the screen all episode.
I love when the Tenderloins are behind, the team that's behind. I just love how they really genuinely dig in and try to keep the contestants' hopes up and do their very best on that third round when everything's at stake. It's really very dramatic. Ben and Dan mentioned that it plays like a sitcom. I think it also plays very dramatically when it works. And that third round is where the drama really kicks in.
I'm someone who, if I see a flaw in a game show, I love to create ideas to try to make the game better. So I thought of an idea that would help resolve this round 3 flaw, and I would love to pitch it to you 3 if you'd like to hear it. You don't have to use it, but to satisfy my brain, I would love for you to hear it and maybe give some feedback if that's okay.
Sure.
Awesome. So here's my round 3 idea. Both contestants still play the same event, but during the commercial break, each contestant must decide a range they want to play with for the final misery index based on their score and their opponent's score. A 20-point range is worth $1,500, a 15-point range is worth $2,000, and a 10-point range is worth $3,000. And both contestants' ranges are revealed at the same time after they have both locked in their answers. Now, this idea ultimately allows for an extra layer of strategy in situations where one contestant has a lead and where both contestants are tied. In addition to locking in their ranges, both contestants will lock in what they believe is the exact answer. So if there is a tie after the round is over, whichever contestant's exact guess is closer to the actual answer, they will be the winner. So Andy, Ben, and Dan, what do you think of my idea?
if we use that, you get no money, you get no residuals. We already came up with that.
We came up with it last night, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, really, random. Yeah.
Bradley, that's a great idea.
It would add an element of jeopardy to it where you get the answer and then you reveal how much they wagered.
Right. So an example of the strategy would be, say one player after the second round is ahead 1,500 to nothing. The player in the lead can play it safe and choose the $1,500 20-point range, knowing that their opponent will try to force a tie by going for the $3,000 10-point range. Or the player in the lead can try and secure the win by going for the $3,000 range, but it's a risk because they only get a 10-point range to work with.
The only concern I would have if we really want to seriously discuss it, Ben and Dan, do you think it might step on the fourth and final round where the rangefinder is a big element?
It's the only thought that came to mind when listening to it. Each round, we wanted a different mechanism. The first round, it's where's it fall with these three on the lane. The second is which is worse. The third is guess the actual number and be the master. And the fourth is you've got the range, and the range is getting smaller and smaller, making it tougher and tougher. And so each round, we like the idea of it constantly changing. So I think in your pitch, it 100% works. I think what you probably end up having to do is flipping the third and the fourth round and making the third round about the range, which I think is really smart and really fun and compete against each other. And then the fourth round, it would be about having to guess the actual number. And that could also totally work. I mean, obviously, I think with where we are with our show, at least for now, I don't think we're looking at that big of a change and overhauls. But the nice thing there is that that totally works. It adds an element of jeopardy that makes it play along and would be really fun.
I like it a lot too, for what it's worth. I'm less experienced than Ben and Dan, but I like it because it adds a little more strategy to the gameplay. And that's pretty great. Maybe if we see a 4th and 5th season, we'd want to explore it.
Well, I truly appreciate your feedback, and I'm glad you like the idea. And if you ever need any more game ideas, whether it be for the Misery Index or any other game shows you produce, you now know who to call.
Yes, definitely.
So, Andy, since the Misery Index has been such a successful game show, are you looking to possibly create more board games or card games that might eventually become television game shows?
Oh my gosh, of course. How could you not? The experience has been so positive in every way. I'd love to do it again, and I'd love to do it again with Ben and Dan. In fact, I have a number of games in the stores, but not every one would work as a TV game show. But there is one that I just sold this last month that I think would work. I'm trying to convince Ben and Dan that it might work for us. So yeah, I'd love to build an empire. I think Merv Griffin had more than a few, didn't he, guys?
Yeah, just a few. Just a few.
Yeah.
And Ben and Dan, now that you have been bitten by the game show bug, are you looking to produce more game shows?
Definitely. We've got a couple in development, and we love the space a lot. You know, it's got that live theater element mixed with a really good, fun show to produce. And I think we've got a couple in the mix. Hopefully another one comes to air soon.
And before we get to the game of the day, Andy, why don't you tell the listeners where they can pick up a copy of the card game? And then Ben and Dan, why don't you tell the listeners where they can watch the Misery Index?
Well, there's actually multiple versions of the card game. The original is called Happens, and you can get that on Amazon, and it's published by Goliath Games. And then we did a home version of the game show called Misery Index. That's also available now on Amazon. And as we were discussing, that's the home version, which is the basic party game, but it's divided into 3 rounds where the rules of the rounds change slightly as you play. So if you love the TV game show, that might be a good choice.
Yeah, and the TV game show is going to be on TBS on October 20th, Tuesday nights at 10:30. Our second half of season 2 starts airing October 20th.
And congrats on getting picked up for season 3.
Thank you. Yeah, we go into production very soon for that, and that'll air sometime early next year.
Well, Andy, Ben, and Dan, we have reached my favorite portion of the game show, and it's always an awesome opportunity for me when I get the chance to create an original game for an actual game inventor and game show producers to play. It is time for the game of the day.
Game of the day.
And as I said at the top of the episode, I have created a Misery Index inspired game for all 3 of you to play. So without further ado, this game is called Now That's Miserable. Now that's miserable. And the background music for this game will fittingly be the song Misery by Maroon 5.
I've never been more frightened in my life.
Don't worry, Andy. You're going to do great. And Ben and Dan, you're going to do great as well. So here's how we play Now That's Miserable. This is going to be a head-to-head-to-head competition. So it's Andy Breckman versus Ben Newmark versus Dan Newmark. Before the show, I came up with 32 Misery Index styled miserable events and asked a number of our Misery Index coworkers to rank these events from 1 to 100 on the Misery Index based on the 3 pillars of misery: physical pain, emotional trauma, and long-term psychological impact. The average of all the participants' rankings determined its final number on the Misery Index. In front of me are 16 numbered pairings of miserable events. During each round, you'll all have a chance to pick a number, and after hearing the 2 miserable events, you must figure out which event ranks higher on the Misery Index. If you're correct, you'll score the points for the round. In round 1, a correct answer is worth 1 point, 2 points in round 2, and 3 points in round 3. After 3 rounds, whoever has the most points wins the game. And if there is a tie after the 3rd round between any of you, we'll play a tiebreaker round. Those are all the rules. Andy, Ben, and Dan, once again, I'm going to ask you, are you ready to get miserable and play this game?
Whew, let's do it.
I'm in.
Well then, let's get miserable. It's time to play Now That's Miserable.
Hold on. Before we begin, Ben and Dan, I'm putting $10 on the table. Each of you open your wallet.
Okay.
There's $30 in the pot. Okay, so now we have a game. Now it means something.
Well, this is definitely a first on the game show, side betting during the game of the day. So I definitely now wish all three of you the best of luck. Let's begin with round one. Correct answers are worth 1 point, and remember the 3 pillars of misery when deciding your answer: physical pain, emotional trauma, and long-term psychological impact. And Andy, we're going to start with you. Which of the 16 numbered pairings would you like first?
Number 8.
Number 8. So here are your 2 events. Remember, you have to choose the one that you think is ranked higher on the misery index. Your choices are: while jumping up and down on a diving board, it snaps in 2. Or, when cleaning the roof of your house, the roof caves in.
Okay, those are kind of similar. Which is more traumatic? That's a great question. I would say the diving board would be more traumatic because there's nothing under you but air. On the roof, you're going to hit the attic or the top floor within 10 feet, I hope. So I would say the diving board.
Are you locking that in?
Yes, and that I think is worse. It's a higher number.
He already locked it in. I'm saying no way.
Yeah, can I make
Totally
a comment
wrong.
and say Andy
Really?
is wrong?
That's a perfect example of what we discussed earlier. I suck at this.
Well, according to the panel of participants, while jumping up and down on a diving board, it snaps in 2, was rated a 37 on the misery index. And cleaning the roof of your house and the roof caves in got a 65, so you were wrong.
I
Andy,
was
if
so
your
wrong.
house- the roof is caving in on your own house. The other one, you fall in a pool.
Yeah, you fall in the pool. That's true.
Diving boards are over water, Andy.
Yeah. You're like, it's just air. This isn't
Oh,
a
I should have done.
diving board on a plane.
Well, I didn't do the research that I should have done.
But no worries, that's only round
Okay.
1. You still got 2 more chances. Ben, you're up next. Which number?
9.
Number 9, okay. Your choices are: you step on a sea urchin while snorkeling, or you see the fin of a shark while swimming in the ocean.
Oh, hands down, it's the fin of a shark. To me, the trauma of the fear of death always ranks more on the misery index, so I'm going to go shark.
Are you locking that in?
Yes.
Well, you see the fin of a shark while swimming in the ocean, that's a 65. You step on a sea urchin while snorkeling is a 45, so you are correct.
Thank you.
Now, if I had seen the fin of a shark in that swimming pool, I would have had a different answer.
Right.
That's true. Or in your attic.
In my attic.
So Ben, you're on the board first with 1 point, and Dan, which number would you like for your first round scenarios?
I'll take 16.
All right, the choices for number 16 are: you see your pastor in a porn video, or you find a dead mouse in your bag of chips.
Wow. I am going to say seeing your pastor in a porn video has a more long-term psychological impact than the mouse and the chips.
I have to say I would disagree for what it's worth.
You're just disagreeing with no context, Andy?
Well, my heart would be beating every time I open a bag of chips for the rest of my life on Earth.
That is true.
Or opening any box or bag of food.
That is true. If it weren't coming from the guy who said falling into a pool is worse than your house collapsing, I'd be more concerned.
Well, wouldn't your life be ruined if every time you watch porn you'd be scared to death you'd recognize someone? I mean, you have to consider that.
For
too.
me, in my lifestyle, that's worse.
So are you locking in the porn video?
Locking it in.
Let's find out which ranked higher on the misery index. You see your pastor in a porn video got a 34.
Wow.
Oh, that's low.
And you find a dead mouse in your bag of chips got a 48. So I'm so sorry, Dan. Andy's logic was spot on with these scenarios.
Wow.
Oh, there you go.
So at the end of the first round, Ben, you're the only one with a point.
This is really exciting, guys.
We're now moving on to round 2. Correct answers are now worth 2 points. And Andy, which number would you like for your second round group of scenarios?
Number 1.
Number 1, okay. Your choices are: you find out that the beef stroganoff you're eating is actually dog food,
That's not good.
or Your dog pulls on its leash and you crash into a mailbox.
That's actually tough because neither one is life-threatening.
Andy, I would argue because of how much you love deli food, all this guy wants is deli sandwiches. That would be traumatic for you.
That's true. And I actually kind of enjoy crashing into mailboxes. It's kind of a hobby. Okay, I will take my friend's advice. It feels like we're on the actual show, doesn't it, guys?
Yeah.
This is fun. I'll take my friend's advice and say the dog food reveal is worse.
Are you going to lock that in?
Yeah, I'll lock that in.
All right, Andy, you got to get on the board, so good luck. You find out that the beef stroganoff you're eating is actually dog food. Only got a 38.
What?
Whoa, that's low.
And your dog pulls on its leash and you crash into a mailbox. That got a 29, so you're right.
Wow.
Oh, there it is.
Wow.
Thanks, guys.
Wow.
Well, thanks for your help. I'm on the board.
Andy, I'm not paying you no matter what happens.
I'll fly out there first class just to collect $10.
And game show fans might recognize the beef stroganoff scenario from a well-known 1973 episode of To Tell the Truth, hosted by Gary Moore. Brad fact.
Oh, we treat you well on this show. Stroganoff. Stroganoff, dig in and enjoy. There are knives and forks and napkins. Righty now, let's meet the person who specializes in unusual dishes. Here we go.
Number one, what is your name, please?
My name is Terry Arnell.
Number two.
My name is Terry Arnell.
Number three.
My name is Terry Arnell.
And as usual, the panel's job is to find out who truly is Terry Arnell, and this is the way the affidavit says. It says, I, Terry Arnell, maintain that meat prices are much too high. As a college student, I simply can't afford to pay $1 for a pound of hamburger, particularly when it fries away to nothing. Fortunately, I've hit on an ingenious, money-saving, palate-pleasing plan. Every meal, from breakfast through dinner, contains the same basic ingredient. Take, for example, my glorious beef stroganoff, which the panel is eating now. Made with noodles, sour cream, carrots, garlic, and potatoes, it is the thrifty shopper's delight. Not only is the meat in my stroganoff healthy and delicious, but also very reasonable in price.
Get out of here, what is it?
Why? Because it's dog food.
It was delicious.
The affidavit is signed Terry Arnell. Terry, take your seat. Well, we learned a lot that time. The only one who recognized the taste was Peggy. Oh, you didn't eat it?
Kitty said it's marvelous.
I said it was delicious, and it still is. I can't help it. It was very good.
I looked at it and it did.
It's a terrible idea, but it's very good.
Well,
It looks
Conal,
funny to me. I
let me
eat
tell you,
everything.
if you really think that we served you dog food,
Yeah.
you're barking up the wrong tree.
Love it.
Wow.
So, Andy, you have 2 points, and Ben, you're up next. Which number?
I believe I have 1 point. I believe I got the first one wrong.
Well,
For
yeah.
round two, you get 2 points. Andy,
Oh,
you're
round
the
two is
game
2
guy.
points.
The stakes were raised.
Oh,
the stakes were raised.
So if we end the show right now, I would win.
Technically, they would still have a chance because they haven't done round 2 yet.
Oh, I see. Okay, then we got to go. Okay.
Ben, which number would you like next?
6.
Number 6 it is, and here are the 2 scenarios to choose from. A cat attacks you while trying to rescue it from a tree, and you fall to the ground. Or you fall 50 feet down into a water well after leaning over too far.
I'm going to have to say you fall 50 feet into a water well. By the way, I do have a fear of cats. I can't stand cats because they pounce and it scares the crap out of me, so I won't get a cat. So that is bad for me, but gotta be falling into a well is worse.
And you're locking that in?
Locking it.
Well, you fell 50 feet down into a water well after leaning over too far. Got a 73. But a cat attacks you while trying to rescue it from a tree and you fall to the ground. Actually got a 49, so you're right.
Yeah.
Well done.
Another 2 points for you, Ben, which means you're now up to 3 points.
I hope mine are this easy, you know?
He gets all the easy ones.
Yeah. Anything with a shark fin in there?
Yeah.
Another shark fin one?
Guys, I'm good at the game. It's not about the questions. Jeez.
Yeah, clearly not. I knew you didn't like me, Bradley.
Brad, thanks for the text, man. Thanks for the text.
Just so you know, I play no favoritisms. I assure all of you that this is a legit game. I'm not switching any of the scenarios after you pick the numbers. I don't want any game show scandals happening here on the game show. All right, so Dan, which number would you like to pick for your second round duo of scenarios?
I'll take unlucky 7.
Well, hopefully for you, Dan, number 7 is actually lucky, and here are the scenarios to choose from. A foul ball gives you a bloody nose at a baseball game, or you propose to your significant other and they say no while on a stadium jumbotron.
I mean, guys, nothing's worse than a foul ball, huh? I mean, the life-shattering effects of a foul ball. I mean, you just gotta think it's getting rejected from your proposal on some sort of stadium screen.
I would say you're wrong, Dan, because they're always fake.
That is true. Those are always fake. But if it were real, then I would say
if it were real.
I would say that, and I'll lock it in.
Well, you propose to your significant other and they say no while on a stadium jumbotron, received a misery index rating of 60.
Yeah.
And a foul ball gives you a bloody nose at a baseball game. Well, that got a 43, so you're right.
Hey.
Well done.
Thank you.
So at the end of round 2, Andy and Dan have 2 points, but Ben is in the lead with 3 points. And this is round 3, the final round, which means correct answers are now worth 3 points.
Oh, okay.
Andy, we're going to start with
Can I tell
you.
The most difficult element of your game is trying to remember which numbers have been already used.
Andy, go with 16.
Numbers 1, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 16 have been used.
Even you just saying that doesn't help me. That's how stupid I am. Okay, so I'll say 2.
Number 2. Now, remember, you have to get this to take the lead from Ben. Your choices are: you pee your pants while giving a presentation in front of your boss at work.
That's bad.
Or you forget your lines on stage during a school play.
Okay, well, they're both bad, but I think people forgetting their lines is pretty common, but peeing your pants in the middle of a presentation is noteworthy. It's something people would remember. And so I would say that is worse.
Are you going to lock that in?
Yes, I would lock that in.
You pee your pants while giving a presentation in front of your boss at work, got a 56. You forgot your lines on stage during a school play. That got a 42, so you're right.
There it is.
Andy takes the lead.
Well, it's even more complicated question, really, because if I pee my pants in front of my boss, I'd have to kill everyone in the room. So the story would not get out. It becomes a very, very ugly mess.
Wasn't that an episode of Monk?
I'm sure it was. I'm just glad it wasn't the pitch of our show while we were pitching.
So, Andy, you have now taken the lead with 5 points. And Ben, since you were in the lead coming into this round, you're going to play last, which means, Dan, you're up next.
Sure. I'll take 11.
Number 11, here are your choices. You fall in a campfire and lose all of your skin on your hands.
Oh, Jesus.
Or
that's bad.
You're forced to completely shave your head.
What?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
When I'm shaving my head, is my entire body on fire?
No, your body's not on fire.
Got it. Okay, well, if that's the answer, then I'll go with the fact that my skin is burned alive and I no longer have skin on my hands. I'll go with that one. And I feel good to lock it in.
You fall in a campfire and lose all of the skin on your hands, ranked a 76 on the misery index.
Uh-huh.
Forced to completely shave your head was only a 27, so you're right.
Hey!
Oh, guys.
Wow.
Who hated these? That's ridiculous.
Ben's had bad haircuts before. That's why he's calling BS.
And fans of Survivor probably figured out that the campfire situation was a reference to a moment that occurred on Survivor the Australian Outback. And Amazing Race fans should remember the head-shaving fast-forward task from seasons 5, 7, and 20. Brad fact!
Ah, well done. Well done. Well, it all comes down to this.
That's right. So, Ben, in order to win, you have to get a perfect score of 6, since Andy and Dan both have 5. So what number would you like?
I'll choose number 4, and guys, get your Venmos ready.
Just as a follow-up, I refuse to pay anybody.
Oh, I will happily pay. It couldn't have worked out more dramatically and perfect.
I agree 100%. A close game and a dramatic finish. 2 of the greatest elements in any game show. So, for 3 points, a perfect score of 6 points, and more importantly, the win, which of these 2 scenarios ranks higher on the misery index, Ben? Is it your body gets stuck while hiding under the bed, or you get stuck while sitting on the toilet?
You mean your body gets stuck in the toilet?
Yes.
Or you get stuck under the bed?
Yes.
Okay, wow, this is interesting, guys. This is a close one. This is not an easy one.
Well, why are you hiding under the bed? Is there like a jealous husband looking for you?
Did your partner accidentally pee in a presentation and he's murdering you?
I would say stuck in the toilet would be more embarrassing.
Ooh.
I think it wins out on the embarrassing factor because in both scenarios you're getting stuck.
So are you locking in getting stuck while sitting on the toilet?
Wait a minute. No, not locking it in. I'm switching my vote. I think stuck under the bed would be more miserable because you would fear, how am I going to get out of here? Am I going to suffocate? Am I going to die under here? I'm going to go to bed.
So you're going to lock in getting stuck while hiding under the bed?
Yes.
Ooh.
All right, let's lock that in.
I would disagree, but let's see what happens.
This couldn't be a better ending. Not only is the entire game riding on this answer, but you switched your answer at the last second. So Ben, let's find out where these events rank on the misery index. Good luck. Your body gets stuck while hiding under the bed. Only got a 39.
Oh.
You get stuck while sitting on the toilet, which was your original guess, but you decided to switch. That received a rating on the misery index of 28. So Ben, congratulations, you're right, you win.
Whoa!
Yes.
Well done.
Wow.
There you go, guys. The master of misery. Venmo it up.
Really are. Yeah, definitely, I will.
So
I'm
Ben,
very
with a
impressed.
perfect 6 points, congratulations, you have won. Now that's miserable.
Fantastic, Bradley. I loved this interview. This was fantastic.
It sucked.
Well, Andy and Dan, I hope you still enjoyed the game.
Very much. And I really appreciate the work you put into it to plan that out.
Had a great time, man. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I had as much fun creating the game as I did hosting it for you 3 to play. And that was the game of the day. Now that's miserable. Now that's miserable. Well, Andy, Ben, and Dan, thank you so much for joining me on the game show to talk about the Misery Index. And if you ever need any assistance with new games that you're creating or game shows that you're producing, I hope you have me in mind.
We definitely
Fantastic.
do. A lot of fun. Thank you, Bradley.
Thanks for the invite.
Well, my pleasure. And if you ever want to join me again on the game show, you always have an open invitation to come back whenever you want to chat some more or compete against each other in another game. All right, Andy, Ben, and Dan, thank you again for joining me today, and take care.
Thanks, Bradley. Thanks for everything.
Thanks,
we
Bradley.
definitely have. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. And before I sign off, it's time for another Bradley Parody. Bradley Parody. This is a brand new feature on the game show in which I create a parody song about an aspect of this episode. And to be honest, out of the 4 Bradley parodies I've created so far, choosing the song for this episode was the easiest, since the original song title perfectly correlates with the topic this episode of the game show focused on, which was, of course, the Misery Index. So, to the tune of Maroon 5's hit song Misery, here is Bradley parody number 4, The Index of Misery. Index. Index. The Misery Index is no ordinary game. Contestants rate events that can cause people shame. But these scenarios are all totally true. They actually happened to people like me and you. So let us see where the strings rated these. On the index of misery, where you'll see a woman giving birth to a baby in a cab, or a guy on top of a burning tree. Although it's miserable, they are so funny to watch. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. At first you just might think this game is so easy, but players be prepared, you just might get queasy. You could see a live leech being pulled out of someone's nose, a dead rat in a Red Bull can, or similar scenarios. So let us see where the strings rated these. On the index of misery, where you'll see woman addicted to plastic surgery, creepy, or a guy struck by lightning ×3. Although it's miserable, they are so funny to watch. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. And here to help the players, the Impractical Jokers, Joe, Salmer, and Q. They bring the laughs and fun, but they have a job to do. Help their contestant not lose, so they can win all the money shown on the Traumatron. Where would you rate this misery, yeah? Being forced to strip on histamines, yeah. Low 50s or high 70s, yeah. The answer is low 50s, yeah. On the index of misery, where you'll see host Jamila break her face on TV, that hurt. Or South Die feature Jaden Smith permanently. Although it's miserable, they are so funny to watch. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. Pain, trauma, and impact. Pain, trauma, and impact. All events circle back to pain, trauma, and impact, yeah. I hope you all weren't miserable listening to my latest song creation. And that was this episode's Bradley Parody. Bradley Parody. Well, I feel very miserable saying this, but we've unfortunately reached the end of this episode of The Game Show. My thanks once again to the creator of the card game Sit + H Happens, and the co-creator and executive producer of the Misery Index, Andy Breckman, as well as the two other creators and executive producers of the Misery Index, Ben and Dan Newmark, for being my special guests today. I also want to give a shout out and huge thank you to my Misery Index co-workers, Paul Steiner, Riley Skirty, Bruno Ferreira, Sarah Kelly, Nick Maritato, Rob Zapula, and Joe Luthner for taking the time to rate all of the miserable scenarios used during today's game of the day. Now that's miserable. I sincerely hope none of the events that I had you rate on the Misery Index actually happened to you in real life. Now, if you cannot get enough of that classic combo consisting of the game show starring Bradley Clarke and the Misery Index, you can check out episode number 45 of the game show featuring the director of the Misery Index, Ken Fuchs, as well as listen to this episode featuring Andy Breckman and Ben and Dan Newmark again by logging on to www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke. That's BRADLY_CLARKE/sets/The Game Show. That's www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke. That's BRADLEY_CLARKE/sets/The Game Show. Plus, don't forget to like The Game Show starring Bradley Clarke on Facebook and follow The Game Show starring Bradley Clarke on Twitter using the handle @TheGameShowBC and hashtag The Game Show. And of course, be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode of The Talk Show, all about the world of television game and competition shows, The Game Show. I'm Bradley Clarke, the Bradster, and I've got to go talk to the psychologists to see where my life ranks on the Misery Index. Bye for now. The Misery Index sound cut used during this episode of The Game Show is courtesy of the TBS television network.
This edition of The Game Show was created and produced by Bradley Clarke. This is Austin Angelo speaking.
The Game Show is a Bradley Clarke production. Get your game on.